Now on the APEC VIP hotline, cutting-edge training for the serious athlete, apecgo.com. Joining us now from Rattle and Hum Sports, Kevin Lonnquist. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm good, Bryan. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thank you very much, sir. I know that you got to see Colin Klein, the quarterback at Kansas State, when they played TCU last weekend, and now there's the big debate right now whether Colin Klein or Johnny Manziel ought to win the Heisman Trophy. I wanted to know where you weighed in on that.
It's hard not to ignore Johnny's candidacy for this coveted trophy. It's never been given to a freshman, and that might be the thing that works against him eventually, because you're going to have a lot of old, overweight, gray-haired sports writers across the country who are voting for this, who are just going to go out of press and say, well, we haven't given it to a freshman yet, so why start now? And I would still make Colin the favorite, even though he didn't play very well against TCU. In fact, Kansas State was not sharp at all. Defensively, they were really good.
Yeah.
But offensively, they really struggled. But they were good enough to win the football game. And he made enough plays to win the football game. The big pass play that set up their first touchdown, and of course, his 34-yard touchdown run in the third quarter that kind of put some distance between and really put the game out of reach against TCU. Johnny's a great player. And the thing about him is that he just has this knack of making something out of nothing. I mean, for instance, he throws the touchdown pass, I think, on A&M's second scoring drive in Tuscaloosa, where he gets caught up in the line of scrimmage, the ball pops up, and he winds up catching it right back to himself and still finds a wide-open guy in the back of the end zone because it basically turned into a yard ball play, and you can't teach that. And the thing that Kevin Sumlin has done with him is given him a lot of free rein to improvise, use his God-given abilities to make play after play, and that's what Johnny's done. He's absolutely deserved the mention of Johnny Football. I guess we saw, too, where his family's trying to get the trademark on that name, too. But the thing is with Colin is that Johnny has emerged over these last few weeks, and obviously his candidacy has taken off because of the win at Alabama, and it should. But again, the body of work is going to go with Colin Klein because of the fact that he won in Norman, he won at West Virginia. They've won every game that they should be winning. He's been very efficient, very effective, and even in the games where he hasn't been sharp, again, last week, TCU being that game, he was still found a way to help his team win a football game. And his team is number one in the BCS, so those things will kind of go hand in hand. It's kind of like the Triple Crown in baseball where Miguel Cabrera won it and wound up winning the AL MVP, and I think that's probably going to be the difference. If Kansas State wins at Baylor tomorrow and then finishes off by beating Texas in Manhattan on December 1st, and I think that Colin plays reasonably well, I think he's going to be your winner.
Okay. I'm going to throw this at you without having prepped you before, but speaking of TCU, I apologize for this, but this just came to mind. A lot of talk right now that Gary Patterson is the front runner for the Arkansas job. Do you see him leaving TCU?
No, I really don't. I think it's like a 70-30 or 80-20 chance that he stays in Fort Worth. I mean, this is the second time that Gary's name has come up with the Arkansas job. I was actually on another station up in Little Rock earlier this week and was asked about it. And the thing that Gary's done at TCU is that he's built a program that's completely in his image. I think if he were to, when he ever leaves, that the program would be sustained well enough so that it would move on to the next coach. It might have a dip, but it would still TCU would still be very solid. And Gary's getting paid $3 million a year. And he's got a really good thing going over there. He and his wife, Kelsey, are building a new house over there in Fort Worth. And see, that's the one thing, and I've tried to tell a lot of people this. And, a lot of people will look at this and say, well, you can talk to his wife, and she doesn't enter into the picture. But this is kind of unusual because his wife, Kelsey, is a Fort Worth girl. She has a lot of ties to that community. And Gary's got it really going well there. And so if Arkansas were to try and sell Fayetteville to Gary, they're going to have to really work on her to get that. Not only but to match, but obviously, quite possibly take his base salary minus incentives to at least maybe $4.5 million to make it worth his while. Plus the fact they're going to have to put together a really good package deal for whatever assistance he wants to bring in, whether it be from his staff or courting assistance from across the country to come to Fayetteville. I know what Arkansas is thinking here is that they want a defensive-minded coach, and that's what Gary is, of course, and they want someone who's got a proven track record, who's got recruiting ties in Texas, and that's what Gary's got. But I also think, too, the major problem here in my mind is that, and I didn't say this in the other station, but I do believe this, I think that the Arkansas people kind of value their job more than the people outside of the state of Arkansas.
Yeah.
And I think, and part of the problem is, and it's a great job, no question about it. If Bobby Petrino doesn't go on an afternoon motorcycle ride, he's probably got that job lined up for the next few years in his image and where he wants to go with it and be very successful. Because he was at the cusp of potentially trying to surpass Alabama and LSU. But see, that's the whole thing that Barry or whoever takes that job is going to have the issue, is trying to put that together and try and climb over those two and potentially A&M.
Good point. Okay. One other scenario that we're finding, and I'm taking a great deal of pleasure in thinking about the possibility of this happening. If things worked out just right, you could see a Cotton Bowl matchup between Texas and Texas A&M. I'm wondering, because of the acrimony between these two schools, how much politicking do you think DeLoss Dodge would be doing behind the scenes to make sure that didn't happen?
I'm sure that there would be a fact on this, but man, it would be so delicious, though, Brian, if that happened, wouldn't it? Though, man, would that be? I mean, after the scorched earth ending that we basically that we had
great.
Two, when they broke off from each other and they swore each other off and said, well, at least from the Texas side said, well, we don't ever want to play them again, and A&M said that they would be open to it, but of course, A&M's got new life and a great season going on in their first year in the SEC. You know, the other thing that you have to weigh into the fact is, and we talked about this before we went on the air, Brian, is the fact that, of course, A&M's now put itself in a position for BCS at large berth, and they're going to probably be tangling with LSU for this. So it's really going to depend on how the Aggies finish out and really how the Tigers finish out. The Tigers have got Ole Miss, and then they go to Fayetteville against Arkansas. And, of course, Arkansas has always found a way to trip them up. It's going to be interesting to see what happens here as far as, what happens in the next couple weeks. I know television would absolutely pay dearly for that. I mean, LSU and Texas would be a great Cotton Bowl, too.
Yeah.
But I think preferably speaking, that they would love to have A&M get there. It's just we've got a lot to decide here in the last couple of weeks before we ever have it. I would love to see A&M and Texas get together in the Cotton Bowl. I think it could happen and should happen if LSU winds up getting the at-large berth, despite what DeLoss might be politicking against. And if you want to play sold out, if you want to make a ton of money on a bowl game, and if you want to get your ratings all sky high, that's a good place. That's a good bowl game to have.
Oh, no question about it. I just think it would be fantastic to see these two teams forced to have to play each other, and A&M would love the opportunity just to stick it into Texas if they could.
Without question.
It'd be so fun.
Without question.
All right, we got games coming up this weekend in the meantime. Let's take, first of all, number 23 Texas Tech against number 24 Oklahoma State in Stillwater.
This is kind of like the battle for, in my mind, the battle of who wants to go to the Alamo Bowl. And I think from that standpoint that it's a really good game from the standpoint that you're going to have some really good quarterbacking play for Oklahoma State. I don't know who that is. It's probably going to be Clint Shelf, or you could see Westline. And then we found out earlier in the week that J.W. Walsh was actually available to play, which was really odd. And I'm going, really? In fact, Mike Gundy confirmed that. I think it's going to be a really good game. I would favor the Cowboys simply because they're at home. This has always been kind of an interesting series between these two teams. The good thing is that both of them are bowl eligible, and it's really going to be beneficial for Oklahoma State because the fact that they've been through so much with their quarterbacking situation that they've had to rotate it's kind of like days of our lives up there in Stillwater with their quarterbacking situation. But I think Texas Tech can make this a really good game. As far Seth Dagey played really, really well. I think he's thrown for 300 yards in 5 consecutive Big 12 games, which is not really unheard of in this conference because they sling it around like nobody's business in here. The thing that Tech's defense is going to have to do is that they're going to have to force some turnovers and get some pressure on whoever is playing quarterback for Oklahoma State. That's the two things about Tech's defense that have really been troublesome this year. As good as they've been and as much improvement as they've made, they have not forced turnovers, and they've also not gotten a lot of sacks.
Okay, and then the funny thing, I did see the one comment you made in your notes section of the Big 12 Extra this week. The loser of this game, the loser ends up in San Diego. I'm sorry, but I'm not finding the loss here,
Well, yeah, there's not a loser, if you will, but it's kind of like it's all about bowl placement, as you know.
Sure.
And it's going to be a question of because when I did my bowl projections last week, I had Tech going to the Alamo Bowl, and I had Oklahoma State probably going to the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl, which was formerly the Insight Bowl. And I kind of thought now that the way things have shifted with the fact that Oklahoma State did become officially bowl eligible, I talked to one of the Alamo Bowl officials at the TCU game last week, and they are looking heavily at Oklahoma State. And it might be a nice change of pace for them to bring somebody new down there because Oklahoma State hasn't been there in a while.
Sure, and they'd bring a lot of people no matter what. Anything to get out of Stillwater, you know?
Exactly. Well, either they or Tech will travel. That's the whole – and you know this, Brian. The whole key is going to be when you're picking bowl slots, it's not about the fourth best team or the fifth best team in your conference. It's who's going to travel.
Yep.
And the win-win for the Alamo Bowl is going to be who's going to go to which fan base will be more motivated to bring their people down to San Antonio for that game. And so that's the question that the Alamo Bowl people are going to have to answer.
Butts in seats. That's what it amounts to there. That's all that matters. Okay?
Absolutely.
All right, number 12, Oklahoma at West Virginia. Back before the season started, we thought this thing could be for the national championship. It hadn't worked out that way.
Not even close. West Virginia, I could see them absolutely getting throttled in this game. Just like I'm not saying Kansas State-esque like it was several weeks ago, but Oklahoma has kind of found that gear. Plus the fact the Sooners are also motivated by a BCS at large berth here. They have a chance to finish 10-2. After this, they have Oklahoma State, the Bedlam series, and then they finish in Fort Worth against TCU. So if the Sooners run the table, they're 10-2. They're probably going to find a way to inch their way into the top 10 of the BCS. That's going to put them in really good position. I think they're motivated by doing that as far as getting to the Fiesta Bowl. Now, Oklahoma A&M, that would be a pretty good Fiesta Bowl, too. Or Oklahoma LSU would be an excellent Fiesta Bowl. That's
Absolutely.
The way that would be. So I think the Sooners are far the better team here. West Virginia's defense is so bad this year. Back in September, Brian, when you and I were talking about this, I really thought that West Virginia's defense was going to get better. They got the new defensive coordinator in DeForest, and it just hasn't worked out at all. They can't stop anybody. They've allowed at least 39 points in all 6 of their Big 12 games. And that's why they're 2-4 in the conference. And I think, and Landry Jones, while he hasn't been spectacular, he's been good, and the defense has picked up. That's the one thing is that Oklahoma's defense has really been playing well here the last few weeks. And even though they gave up some points last week to Baylor, they still made Nick Florence have a tough day. He was 0 for throwing everybody. So I think Oklahoma wins this game by a couple of scores, even though everybody in West Virginia is still looking forward to the game.
Oh, I'm sure they are. Well, and then the final game, is there a possibility of another miracle on the Brazos when Baylor hosts Kansas State?
Boy, it's going to be hard. I look at Baylor and say, if they would not they would not be their own worst enemy in some cases because they just turn the ball over too much. And Nick Florence has been wildly inconsistent in several games this year. I just mentioned the OU game last week. If Nick is on and has a solid game against OU, the Bears probably can find a way to pull that game out. I think the good news for Baylor is that, I think they have found their running back in Lake Seastrunk, which is a big improvement. I think he's the best. I said all the way back in spring football that he was the best running back on their roster. He probably just didn't have the experience, and plus the fact that he had sat out when he was at Oregon. So he had this big, long layoff before he's finally got into the flow of things. And it looks like he's emerged as their guy. Kansas State has got some injury issues that they've got to deal with here. Ty Zimmerman, one of their safeties, he was in a boot last week against the latter stages of the TCU game. Tyler-Longview, who's probably one of the best return men in the country, if not the best return man in the country, has got an ankle issue. So I don't know if both of those guys play, to what extent are they going to be effective? And Kansas State's defense, the good news for Kansas State is that they've seen similar offenses like this with Oklahoma State and West Virginia and Texas Tech, and they've managed to shut them down. Now, they shut down Oklahoma State and Texas Tech in Manhattan. They did it on the road in Morgantown. But they're going to have to be – I still think Baylor's offense, though, is very explosive. I don't think Baylor's going to win the game at all. I give them probably a less than 5% chance. Baylor's going to have to be so perfect tomorrow, and Kansas State is going to have to help them. And that's the one thing that the Wildcats don't do, Brian, is that they don't beat themselves. Fewest penalties in the conference. That's 32. I mean, we're talking 32 penalties in 10 games. That's extraordinary. And then you've also got the fact that they take the ball away. They are plus 20 in the turnover ratio, right? That's also an error. And they're just so methodical. They aren't flashy. You look at them and say, what's the big deal? But they just win, and they just don't beat themselves. And you know what? Sometimes, slow and steady wins the race, and that's why I think Kansas State wins this game. I think they'll get pushed a little bit, but I think they'll still win the game.
They remind me of the 2002 Ohio State team that won the national championship when they beat Miami in the championship. Same kind of team. I mean, dull as dirt, but man, they can play just enough to win.
Yeah, and it's funny that you bring up that Ohio State team as we get off topic for a second, because people get mad about the the controversial finish. And I always argue it's because my roots are in the Big Ten. I said, well, does anyone want to talk about the pass interference on Miami late in that game against that should have been called on Miami, that wasn't on one of the big third down conversions that the Buckeyes converted? But that's another argument for another time. But the thing is, I know college football has kind of transformed into a quick yards, quick points. It's easy this, easy that, and that sort of thing. But sometimes old school Kansas State is proving that old school football works.
Sure, and I believe that's why the SEC won 6 straight national championships, because defense still works. And a lot of schools like West Virginia and some in the Big 12 have kind of abandoned defense, and I think they're finding out you just can't win football games. You're not a solid football team if you can't play some semblance of defense.
Good points on that. Is that one? You're right, and of course all those teams faced each other. But what I do find interesting is, getting back to the A&M Alabama game, and it's true when A&M with this high-flying offense and how they spread it around and spread you out and so forth, that every defensive coordinator in the SEC said it took them a quarter and a half, maybe the whole half, to get adjusted to what A&M was doing offensively, and that's why they blew out Mississippi State in Starkville, and they blew out Auburn, who's having an awful year anyway, but just blew out Auburn, and why Alabama had so many problems with A&M. And heck, LSU had problems getting started with A&M this year. The other thing I would have loved to see, too, and it kind of makes you think about it even more, is I really would have liked to have seen what Oklahoma State could have done with Alabama or LSU last year in the national championship game. Of course, that's all hindsight. But given that offense and how efficient it was, it would have been interesting to see how that would have matched up.
Yeah, it would have been a great football game, no question about it. Kevin, great talking to you as always. We appreciate it, man.
Hey, always a pleasure, Bryan. You have a great Thanksgiving, okay?
You do, too. Thank you very much. Kevin Lonnquist is the Big 12 insider for RattleandHumSports.com on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM.